I didn't know whether to call this story a different March break or possibly Grandma's last trip. I'll go with a different March break. Did I ever tell you about the time we brought a body back across the border? I can tell the story now, even related with inflections that hinted at amusing aspects of the narrative, though it certainly wasn't funny at the time. We were up at Kelly and Martha's cottage. Besides Kelly and Martha, there was Karen and I, Felix and Olga, and Peter and Catherine. We were telling stories about vacation trips that had gone wrong or had turned out differently from what we had expected. There were the usual tales of lost luggage, 5-star resorts that turned out to be dives, cruises featuring norovirus, and so on. And after a few glasses of Merlot at dinner, I was relaxed and expansive. "Oh, Keith, you really can't tell that one. It's not funny, even if you think it is," said Karen. "Oh, I don't know. It had its amusing moments," I replied. Karen half smiled resignedly and took another sip of Chardonnay. So I continued. "It was the year your mother rented the condo at Clearwater. 92, wasn't it?" I said, looking to Karen for confirmation. She nodded. "There were 5 of us there. Your mother had gone down for the winter, and we drove down for the March break in that '88 Plymouth Voyager. Karen and I with Jason and Emily. They were behaving as typical teenagers. Couldn't get them to put their Game Boys down, though I suppose it's worse now with smartphones." "You can say that again," said Felix. "Grandkids never put theirs away. Even if we're at a restaurant, they have their eyes glued to them the whole time, including when they're actually eating." "Yeah, well, like I was saying, we were all at this condo. I guess we'd been there a couple of days, and Elspeth, that's Karen's mum, says she's not feeling well. I figured it might be a dose of food poisoning from the clams we'd had at dinner, but it wasn't. It turns out it was a stroke." "So how's that funny?" interjected Catherine. "It doesn't sound funny to me." "No, it wasn't, that's for sure," said Karen. "Well, that's not the part of the story I wanted to get to," I said. "The first part wasn't funny at all. We took Grandma to the hospital, and they said it was a stroke, and they admitted her overnight. We had to put down our credit card, but I figured we'd be all right. We'd get it back on Elspeth's insurance. She always took out extra over the winter just in case. So they kept her there 2 days, and then they discharged her. I figured we'd better get her home to Ontario ASAP, as she wasn't looking too good. So we persuaded Elspeth, and then we went charging around the condo, packing up, getting rid of the food out of the fridge, cleaning out the condo. All this time, Emily and Jason are totally unhelpful and complaining that we're going to miss going to Disney World at Orlando on the way home like we planned. So, Friday lunchtime we get in the car. Karen and I are going to take it in turns to drive non-stop back to Toronto. Elspeth said she felt okay and was up to the journey. There's me and Karen in the front, kids in the second row, and Grandma at the back. Luggage we had to divide between the second and third rows. In a Voyager, it was pretty cramped with all our stuff. So now we're on the I-75. Things are going well despite grumbling from the second row. We've just got past Chattanooga when Emily says, "I think there's something wrong with Grandma." "What do you mean, honey?" says Karen. Emily says she's all slumped over. So we take the next exit and pull over. Karen gets the door open and leans over to the back. She can't wake her up. Then I try, and I check for a pulse in her wrist and on her neck, but I can't find one anywhere. "So," says Olga, "I'm still not seeing the funny side of all this." "No," I replied, "I never said the whole thing was a joke. There was definitely a journey to remember, which is what I thought we were talking about." "Okay, go on then," urged Peter. Well, it was clear that Karen's mother had died somewhere before we reached Chattanooga, Tennessee. What on earth were we going to do? The hospital stay in Clearwater had already cost us $5,200, and that's back in '92, remember. We hadn't found Elspeth's insurance policy to see what might or might not be covered. Did she have coverage for repatriation of her body if she died while she was in the States? So there we are at a gas station just off the I-75 arguing about what to do. Emily's crying over Grandma's death, and Jason's back on his Game Boy like nothing's happened. I said, look, we're just going to have to take her back with us to Ontario. We take her to the hospital here, heaven only knows how long it will take, how long we'll be stuck here, and how much it will cost. Emily gets all hysterical and screams, you mean we're going to have to go all the way back home to Toronto with a body in the back with us in the van? Jason just says, yuck, gross. This goes on for some time. Poor Karen's getting more and more upset. Finally I said, come on everyone, quiet down Emily. We all love Grandma, but we really don't have a choice. Let's leave Grandma in the back and we'll cover her up with a blanket so that she can sleep peacefully while we drive home. We'll deal with everything else when we get there. You said, I guess that's all we can do, right, Karen? We all got back in the car. Now we couldn't all leave the car and go for a meal or anything because someone had to stay behind with Grandma. So it was food from drive-thrus from then on. The van gradually got to look like a travelling garbage can. By the time we stopped to get food, eat, bathroom breaks, it's going to be around noon on Saturday before we'll reach Detroit. So we stop at the rest area near Bowling Green, Ohio to get prepared. I was also starting to get a bit worried that Grandma might start to go off, but I kept my mouth shut on that one. Look, I said, everyone has to cooperate on this. We've got to get Grandma across the border without anyone realising that she's dead. If we screw up on this, we'll be in serious trouble. Here's what we've got to do. I know this is difficult, kids, but would one of you be prepared to sit in the back with Grandma? Keep her sat up. Jason, Emily? After a lot of arguing and crying comments, this was just too gross. Karen stepped up and volunteered to sit with her mum. Jason sat in the front with me. The baggage was shoved into the middle. Okay folks, we don't have to show documents on the American side of the bridge, only on the Canadian side. Jason, you keep all 5 passports, and when we get to the booth I'll ask you for them. Nobody's to say a word. If they know anything about Grandma, I'll say she's fallen sick. We've come home because we can't afford to pay for a US hospital. Then I'll ask for directions to the nearest hospital in Windsor. Karen Sweet, can you make sure we have the money for the toll on the bridge? We pay it on the Canadian side. In the event, getting across the border was a total anticlimax. After the usual wait to get to the Canadian Immigration and Customs booths, the agent simply asked us where we'd been. I said, Florida. Had we bought anything while we were there? No, I said. We just went down for a few days for March break. After asking where we live, Toronto, she simply said, well, welcome home, and waved us through. What a relief. We did run into a problem once we got home. I asked the kids whether they wanted to be dropped off at home or do they want to come with us to the funeral home where Grandma would be resting. Surprisingly, after all the back chat since Chattanooga, they said of course they wanted to stay till Grandma had been safely handed over to the funeral director. So we drove into Mellors' parking lot and I went in to explain the situation to James Mellors. What I didn't know was that the funeral home can't accept a body without a signed death certificate. James told us we'd have to get one at the hospital. So I went back to the car, explained this new situation of bump in the road. We drive to East York General. At Emerge, I left most of the family in the car. Emily came in with me. I wasn't sure what to do. Should we wait in line for the triage nurse or what? Luckily, there was an ambulance driver in the waiting area. I told him what had happened. He said, take your car to the entrance where the ambulances go, and I'll tell them to expect you there. It was an incredible weight off my shoulders and a stroke of luck, because Emerge was packed and we could have waited for hours. Emily and I got back in the car and we drove round to the area that said ambulances only. And after a minute or two, the doors opened to let us in. That put us directly into the treatment part of Emerge. The staff there were really helpful. They laughed when I told them our story, then they realised they shouldn't and shut it off quickly. They brought out a gurney and a stretcher and took Elspeth out of the car and into the hospital proper. Luckily, things wrapped up reasonably quickly after that. Elspeth was put into one of the small interview-style rooms, still on the gurney, and after a while a doctor came and pronounced that she was indeed dead. He signed a death certificate. He said they'd have to inform the coroner as it was an unusual death and she wasn't directly under a doctor's orders. Meanwhile, a police officer came and asked a whole lot of questions about the circumstances of Elspeth's death. Karen explained that Elspeth was her mother, gave Elspeth's date of birth, address and all that stuff, and showed Elspeth's passport. Then I told the officer about Elspeth's stroke down in Florida, how we decided to bring her home right away instead of leaving her to finish her winter vacation by herself. Then I explained how Emily had noticed that her grandma seemed to be collapsed near Chattanooga and why we decided to bring her straight home. The officer said he understood what we'd done and why, but he'd have to make a report, and there might be an issue over whether any part of that was illegal, but he wasn't sure. The hospital staff said they would arrange for Mellis's to take possession of Elspeth's body and that we could go home. We should make the funeral arrangements with Mellis's the next day. There might be another interview with the police, but they let us know. In the end, there was some discussion about how Elspeth's death ought to have been handled. According to the law, the nearest Canadian embassy or consulate should have been informed to assist in making the arrangements for repatriating the body. But as the police officer said, although we don't approve officially at least of what you did, in reality it was reasonable. You didn't delay in reporting the death and the official channels would have been both expensive and protracted. So please accept my condolences for your loss. And that was that. We had a nice quiet funeral for Elspeth later in the week. Jason and Emily got the day off school to attend, and after the ceremony itself there was telling and retelling of our journey back from Florida at the reception. When I look back at the whole situation now, especially now that we're no longer grieving Elspeth's death, there are really some quite amusing aspects. Kids, for example, how grossed out they were, but then how tender they were when it came to leaving Grandma at the hospital. Then the state of the van really looked like the back of an alley, downtown with all the litter, and Karen worrying that the kids weren't getting nutritious meals. It really was a different March break.